Grew up in a ranching home and a very, very small town in South Texas. There was no band program, no music program in the school. There were 72 students in the high school when I graduated. There were 6 in my graduating class. So I was in the top 30% academically, and I take pride in that. But when I was a sophomore in high school, a man just graduated from college. He was in the World War II, graduated in 1949, and came to Charlotte, Texas, started a band. It's kind of like the Music Man. And I decided that that really sounds interesting to me. And I'd been in church music in a little small town. And so I started on the trombone as a sophomore in high school, beginner. And because the school system was so small, we had 7th and 8th graders in the high school band just to get enough to a quorum to play anything. Interestingly, I hope this is not boring, but our alma mater was Go You Northwestern. Did I say alma mater? Well, our fight song was Go You Northwestern, played fast. And we economized there on music. But I fell in love with it, and it really touched my heart. And I wanted to teach. And I really didn't want to follow in my father's footsteps. If you've been a rancher and a farmer in dryland Texas, the future is kind of bleak at times. But I enjoyed that, and I wouldn't take anything from that upbringing because it was so Americana and rich. But then I went to a small school near there in San Antonio, and there were no full-time instrumental faculty. There were adjunct. There was a part-time band director. No facility. So that's how I started my career in college. It's just circumstances in 1952. The techniques courses, instrumental techniques and so forth, I actually learned the wrong embouchure on clarinet. I really didn't know anything about percussion, and it was just skimmed over. Conducting was taught by an associate piano instructor who held a book in one hand and literally. So I graduated in 1956 and was drafted. I said that to a college class one time, and they said, "What team?" Well, it was Uncle Sam. But long story, I was rejected. I had a bad knee at that time and flat feet and some other things, so I was rejected. But I was in October of 1956, and I had no job. I took a part-time job, and a director in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas was killed in an auto accident, tragically. So I heard about it and went down, and I guess I was the only warm body in Texas that wasn't teaching band director. So I got that job in December of 1956. It was really tragic. But what I inherited with my inexperience was an emotional situation where there were the students were very involved or loving that band director that got killed and the tragic, and he was doing a great job. But the program I inherited was very poor, to say the least. So there was I had to deal with emotional things, and I really wasn't prepared for that at 21 years old, and I really struggled. I spent a lot of time on my knees praying and resigning, writing letters of resignation, but I hung in there. The first couple of years were not well. Were not successful. And after the second year, I was out in the parking lot, and I was angry and frustrated. And my first mentor came up to me and said, "How many times have you had anyone into your band hall, or how many times have you visited another band hall? How many times have you sought help and assistance?" And this was an epiphany moment for me. He said, "Do you think you know everything?" I said, "I thought I did." So that was, like I say, a turning point in my life, because then I realized, wait a minute, you know nothing, and you better start learning. So I really learned the hard way by observing any techniques, any strategy, pedagogy, or whatever. But the Rio Grande Valley, and I hope it's not boring, but the Rio Grande Valley in 1956 had the finest band programs maybe in the nation. And they were all clustered in that small geographic area of South Texas. So there was a wealth of information. I just learned how to tap into it. But I think our profession is the best at mentoring others. And I've not found one iconic director who was not willing to sit down and stop what he was doing and help a young student or a young director. That's some of the curriculum I hope we're developing here at the Midwest Clinic, also in our Gen X series and some of the really fundamental clinics that we're able to focus on. So then we began to experience some success there. But my salary was $2,900 a year, so I thought I needed to move on. So I moved to Central Texas, where my former high school band director had opened a music store. So I went there, and there was a really good junior high school, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade school that had come open. And it was a really good band program, so we didn't start from scratch. We started higher up on the level. So that was a great advancement for me personally and career. Not that the first part was educationally wonderful. I actually, in 1958, came to Vandercook University. A lot of the directors in the Valley were coming to the Chicago area to go to Vandercook, and I came here. But for some reason, I'm not sure, can't remember exactly why, there was some accreditation était, and it wasn't worth me coming back the next summer. But what a wonderful summer I spent at Vandercook. And as I was honored with an honorary doctorate last May, and I told them I'd finally graduated from Vandercook University, in a manner of speaking. There were so many iconic people teaching at Vandercook at that time. So it was, and I drove up here in my car, which was a mistake from Texas. I had to take everybody everywhere, errands. But it was just a wonderful experience. And then that was when I was still in the Valley. But I moved to Central Texas, and that's where I met my wife. Right after I moved there, I was also part-time choir director in a church to make a little extra money, but that was part of my life and my faith. So I met my wife, and we were married there in 1961. And I'd like to just stop here just for a moment and credit her with, I would not have been able to do anything in my career, in my life, without her. And thank goodness she was not a musician. She had a master's in business and English, as it turned out. We were finally able to achieve that. And I can't tell you what she did for me in my life in that area. She could have been a musician because she could nail whatever was wrong with a band, I'll tell you, especially mine. But we were married in 1961, and I stayed there 4 years in this school. And we actually ended up being third in the state in honor band one of those years. So I'd made a lot of personal progress. Not that that's important, but to learn how to really deal with kids' lives. I'd like to go back. I had an incident in the town I was in the Valley, Mercedes. There was a youngster who had a prosthesis. Most of his leg was an artificial leg. And he wanted to be in the marching band. And I kept finding every excuse for that child not to be in marching band. So one night we were at rehearsal, and Renee came up and said, "There's a hole out there. So-and-so's missing, and I don't think they're coming back." And he just kept pestering me. And I finally said, "Okay, get in." So he hobbled out there, and from that moment on, he never missed a rehearsal, never missed a performance, marching. I learned a valuable lesson. I was inhibiting that child from realizing his fullest potential, emotionally, spiritually, musically. And you learn from students all along, and they're what we need to keep as the top priority. That's who we're after. And it's a life skill that we're teaching. And after 4 years in Temple, Texas, at Lamar Junior High School, I moved next door to be the middle school director at Belton High School in Central Texas, north of Austin, about 60 miles. And I knew that the head director was going to move up to another position out of the state, actually, and I knew I would be in line to be the head director of this school, and it was a larger school. So I spent my first year there, inherited not much, and he was gone a lot, so I sort of was able to go into the high school by that route. And I spent 15 years in Belton, and our children were born there. And we took the band to the Rose Parade. I reminded Doc Severinsen last night of that, but he turned it into something else, so I lost that battle. And 1974 Tournament of Roses Parade. Great trip. Those kids, most of them had never been out of Bell County. Those are the experiences you always remember, and the kids and how it affects them. 1979, I heard about the Spring School District near Houston, and I came and walked to my wife, and I said, "Have you ever heard about Spring?" And she said, "No." I said, "Well, I haven't either, but let's go check it out," because several people had called me and said, "You ought to check it out." So I did. We went down and looked at it, and we decided to make the move. But that was a really difficult move. All our kids had been born in Belton, and so we moved to Spring School District in 1979, and it was, what's the word I'm looking for? I really advocate that you don't let yourself get in a rut, that you look at different ways that you can grow. So that was for me a time that I grew in my career and everything. Not to be pretentious, but when I became supervisor or director of programs, then as an administrator, I encouraged directors who seemed to be struggling and they'd been in a position a good while to consider change, whatever that change is. I don't know, but you need to refresh your direction and so forth. So for me, it was just a new opening in my life to take my life to a career to a higher level and so forth. And my wife sacrificed. She was on a road to get a doctorate and an administrator in university, and I picked her up, and she gladly went. And she passed away a year ago this Saturday. And I spent 3 years there as a high school director. And then we split our campuses. It was one high school on two campuses, but we created two independent high schools, and I became an administrator then. So my focus then became teachers who would affect kids rather than directly influencing. It was difficult for me to walk off the podium because I had really good players. We were able to do some really wonderful music, but I had to take that opportunity, or it may not have come back. And I had an administrative degree, so I was able to do that. So then I spent a total of 21 years in the Spring School District. I retired in 2000. I'm getting to the end of this story, Jeff. And then I became on the board of directors of the Midwest Clinic in 1992, really because of John Painter. And also that same year, right before that, my wife and I became the coordinators of the National Contraband Festival. Now that has grown into the music festival because it encompasses choir, orchestra, jazz, band, and chamber, and everything else. But we worked with Mr. Painter at that time, and I think he saw my wife mostly organizing everything, and he said, "Why don't you join us on the Midwest board?" And of course, I was speechless for about 3 years on the board. So that was in 1992, and I retired from Spring School District in 2000, and have spent most of my energy and time and effort with the Midwest Clinic, and it's really become a labor of love.